passage we just keep coming back to over and over as a church community. They committed to learning together, to sharing together, and to praying together. And secondly, to encourage one another in developing and sustaining a personal rule of life. Again, this is something we've been looking at over the last couple of weeks. This is a rhythm of practices that might sustain us and enable growth in our lives. It's not just enough to wish some good thoughts about spiritual growth. We actually have to put a structure, a rhythm into place. And these groups can be such a great encouragement as we do that together. So I encourage you, if you're interested in being part of a growth group or facilitating and leading a new growth group, please come and see me, talk to me, text me, even if it's in the middle of the night. Happy to receive those texts. Probably won't answer them, but happy to receive them. Just get in touch. You have my number and my email. Couple more things. Giving. As a church, this is just one thing we really value. And so many of you have given faithfully over the years. And as an eldership recently, we've been just talking again about the fact that sometimes giving can just fall off the wayside of our prayer because we've stopped handing those funny little bags around. Have you noticed that? We've actually stopped doing that. And COVID was a part of that. And then we realized, when you jingle it at the end of the rows and going through, there's actually not much there. But we've been realizing that actually it's not about that. Busyness, distraction, and restlessness are major blocks today within our spiritual lives. Tell us how you really feel, Ronald. I've put Richard, it's actually Ronald. Got that wrong. She's a little heavy, but I think she's also a little true. And excuse the broad brushstrokes. He's trying to, identify a broad theme here. But I think it's one that we ourselves as a community have identified. Busyness is a major block to spiritual growth in our time. Or as the famous Dallas Willard once put it, hurry is the great enemy of the spiritual life in our day. I've been thinking about this personally, this idea of busyness, and for me, I think it shows up less in the amount of activity I have in my life, although being a young dad, 4 kids, there's plenty of that just by default. But naturally I err towards space, and if you know me, you probably think, you just have coffees, right? That's what goes on in my thoughts, what that racing mind tends to create blockages for God to be at the center. And I wonder that about us today is that troubling thought about busyness is not necessarily just all that we have on our plate, although I think that's important to look at, but also just that sense, that troubling sense, that God feels somewhat removed from our activities, that he feels a little on the periphery, on the edge of things. And so this morning, I don't want to wade into all the layers of why this is, of why this busyness seems to be just the new normal for today's world, but I want rather to pursue maybe something of a practical step for us to go against this grain. And I want to start in Acts 2. This has just become something of a text for me that I just keep going back to, because in it we get a glimpse of the early church, in many ways a model of church life at its best. And it says in verse 42 of Acts 2 that they, the early believers, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and, I highlight, the prayers. The prayers. Isn't that interesting? It doesn't say prayer, singular. It says the prayers. What's going on here? What are they talking about? They are talking about an ancient practice seen in the life of Old Testament characters like Daniel and David, seen in the life of Jesus, seen in the life of the early church across the pages of the book of Acts. And it's this ancient practice called fixed hour prayer. This may instantly grab you as religious sounding, as kind of stuffy and structured and what Catholics do. But permit me a few seconds and minutes to wade into this a little further and to see if there might be some value here still for us as a church. This practice of fixed hour prayer tended to happen in these times, in the evening, in the morning, and in the middle of the day. It was interesting because I've been quite refreshed to look at this again and to realize that the Jewish day started in the evening at sundown to the next day at sundown. Their day was from evening to evening. And so fixed hour prayer, they paused and they prayed in the evening. And they got up the next day, they took some time to pray. And then again, around the middle of the day, when those noon bells ring, they prayed again. Now, you will probably find yourself personally, just in how God has wired you, somewhere along this continuum of spontaneous at one end through to structured at the other. And we've done this before, but again, just a show of hands who would say they kind of are more along the spontaneous end of the curve. I definitely put my hand up for that. Yeah. Some of you highly so, others of you moderately so. I'm probably more of a moderate, spontaneous guy. What about structured? Who would say you're more fit in the structured camp? Yep. Awesome. Again, some of you literally want to plan your day and week and hour by the minute. Others of you are like, no, I lean towards structure, but I'm not hard out in that way. Well, here's the thing. For all of you spontaneous leaning people, this is a verse that I think all of us should keep at the forefronts of our minds. 1 Thessalonians 5, 16 and 18, it's pure gold. It's pure gold, this few verses. It says, rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. For this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Those of you on the spontaneous side of the spectrum are just going, yes, see? Fixed hour prayer, that's nonsense. We just should be practicing the presence all day long. Don't give me any of this sort of fixed hour nonsense. And I hear you. And I kind of lean more into that as a just natural bent and disposition. But we have to balance this with what we read in the Psalms, Psalm 55, 16 and 17. David writes, as for me, I call to the Lord, and the Lord saves me. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. Sounds a little like fixed hour prayer, doesn't it? That actually David was intentional at certain points in his day to pause, to cry out, and to pray to God. And I love it because in a message I recently listened to on this very topic, the preacher shared a quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and he was comparing this idea of fixed hour prayer and how it fits into just a life of prayer and praying without ceasing to the concept of marriage, and how when you're young and in love and in the honeymoon years of your marriage, you think that just by sheer love and feeling, it's going to sustain you over the years. But here's what Dietrich Bonhoeffer said. He said, it's not your love that sustains the marriage, but from now on, the marriage that sustains your love. That might sound like a wet blanket for some who are in the early years of marriage, but I can tell you this is the recipe, this is the secret sauce, that actually having a rhythm and a commitment which would involve set times where you intentionally commit to loving one another. That's going to sustain you. And I look out in this room and I see people who have been married 30 plus years, 40 plus years, 50 plus years. Would you agree with me that over the years, love is more and more a decision, as well as containing the feelings that come with that? And so what might this fixed hour prayer thing look like for us? What might it look like in practice? Just a few thoughts to put out there for us today. Firstly, I think it has to look like pushing the pause button. You see, a number of you wrote busyness, a number of you wrote distraction, a number of you wrote, oh man, there's so much on my plate. I'm not prioritizing time with God. And what I want to encourage us all in, and I'm not practicing currently what I preach here, I'm preaching to myself, is that we need to learn to push the pause button. For some of you, this might start with just once in your day. But for others who've developed over the years a rhythm of meeting with God in the morning or in the evening or wherever your energy is most